Hi, and welcome to the Natural Doctors live webinar. We're really excited today to welcome Debbie Bere, who is founder of Sex Debbie and sex educator. Good. Hi, Debbie.
Hi everyone.
Hi. It's lovely to have you on. So if we could ask you first of all just to explain a little bit about yourself and kind of your role, that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. So I'm Debbie. I am a mum of two. I'm married in a long-term relationship. I started Sex Debbie to help educate everyone. So as a sex educator, we often think of sex education for young people and teenagers, but actually I think it's really important we understand that sex education is something that starts when we're young, but actually should continue sort of throughout our lives in almost like a sex re-education as we hit different life chapters and help us normalize conversations that we might find tricky and break taboos and just talk about sex.
Yeah, so basically just getting the conversation started, really. I suppose that's, in some ways, it's part of the hardest part, really, is to get the conversation actually to get going.
Yeah.
So I suppose my first question really would be, how do you start that conversation, really? I mean,
it's hard. Everyone is different. Everyone, and that's completely normal. I think it's really important to recognize that there's no one size fits all when it comes to sex, sexuality, relationships, or anything like that. So that's really, really important to recognize at first. And also sort of looking at how we talk to someone, the language we use. So if it's confrontational, if it's sort of vulnerable, making sure you're at a time where you're not sort of feeling in that way. So if you want to have a talk with a partner, for example, make sure it's not straight after you've had sex or in an awkward moment where you feel uncomfortable. Make sure it's, at a moment where you're both on neutral ground. If you want to have a talk with your young person, if you've got children, we always frame this sort of sex talk, the talk, have you had the talk? And actually we have this image of sitting opposite each other and having this really intense sort of discussion, which everyone feels really awkward and that's not it. It's not having the talk. It's having a multiple conversations throughout their lives, from being toddlers right up to adults. And those conversations are sort of in the car, side by side, where you're not staring at each other, or out for walks, or just answering questions straight up, like honestly, as honestly as you can. If you don't know the answer, being like, I don't know the answer. Should we learn this together? Should we look together? And sort of safeguarding them in that way. So language is really important, and how we approach things is really important. Trying to be neutral, trying not to sort of say you're doing it wrong, because actually we need to know more about ourselves and guide and communicate, because no one's a mind reader, especially when it comes to sex. No one's a mind reader. You might have had several partners, you might have had hardly any partners. It doesn't matter, because everyone is different with what they want and what they like.
Yeah, I suppose it's also a little bit about confidence as well, isn't it? I mean, there has to be some confidence in there, really, to be able to communicate. Actually, it's okay to say what you want, I suppose, isn't it? And being able to go, it'd be quite nice, really, if we could do what I like instead of just. But also, from the other half, I would also say that it must be nice for your partner not to just have to guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of knowing, firstly, having the confidence to explore your own body is massive. There's a lot of shame around masturbation and touching ourselves and understanding what feels good to you. But actually, we need to do that. We need to explore our own bodies. We need for young people to do that, because actually then they know what they like, and they're more likely to enter positive sexual experiences because they know what's right for them. Same with us as adults. The sex and sexual interactions we liked, say, in our 20s, change as we grow and get older through different life stages, and that's completely normal. We shouldn't expect to have the same thing we like then. We change and grow as individuals, just as sort of our taste in clothes or anything else does. It's the same for sex. So it's being confident enough to explore ourselves and understand what's right for us. And then in order to communicate that, it's normalizing those topics in your everyday world, whether it's following people like me on social media and sort of normalizing those conversations, or having books at home that you can sort of flick to and check. And I mean, for example, I have flower pots with penises and breasts on, because it just starts a conversation with someone that they wouldn't normally have.
I think when you look at children, I think a lot of parents are a bit scared that if they talk to their kids about sex, that'll make them more interested in sex. So it'll make them more. But I think they actually shows the opposite. When we look at sex education, the more you educate your children about sex, I think that from what I see in the research, that actually it does the opposite, doesn't it?
Yeah. So the World Health Organization found out, I believe it was earlier this year or end of last year, that actually a more sex positive approach, understanding that sex is enjoyable and it's okay to like it, actually ensures better use of condoms, safer sex, and better choices. They're not as likely to rush into sexual relationships because they know they want their sexual relationships to feel good. They're doing it because it's meant to feel good rather than because they feel like they should, or that's what happens. Actually, am I comfortable enough with this person for it to feel good and for them to make me feel good and to communicate? For example, I had a class yesterday and I said to them, if you are not able to feel comfortable enough to have these conversations with someone you want to have sex with, then maybe consider if you're comfortable enough to enjoy the experience.
Yeah,
and that's really important.
That's a great phrase. Yeah. I also wonder with teenagers especially, I mean, the more you kind of, I don't know, the more they kind of put the kind of, you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do this, shouldn't do this, I can almost feel them wanting to do it.
Yeah. Oh my God. And don't we all? If like someone says you're not allowed chocolate for a week, all you think about is chocolate then. So it's the same with everything. It's, especially when, I suppose, we were growing up, sex education was very much you will get pregnant, you will get STIs, don't do it. So it was that fear mongering. And actually, we then grow into adults who want to start families, and it's not as easy to have children as we were told in sex education. It's not going to happen as soon as the first sperm hits you or anything like that. It's not that simple. And so that then all of a sudden we're thinking, okay, is what we've been told here right? You know, for some people it might be the case, but not for everyone. And then also actually telling people that STIs are going to make your penis fall off, or you know, the fear that goes into with the education, that stopped people from getting STI testing, which is really important. Regular STI testing is very important. We're lucky enough to live in a world where we have medication for that if needed. So actually maybe we need to look at, okay, if you've got an STI, 70% don't show any symptoms. It's like asymptomatic. So actually it shouldn't be saying this is what's going to happen, it's going to be green and horrible and gross, because actually it's not. Yeah, take the stigma away from it and just say, actually, this is what happens at an STI test. It's really simple, it's really easy, and it's really important to know what is normal for you. That's your body. Is that normal for you? If it's not, let's get it checked. And just that fear mongering.
The other thing that I've read a lot on your pages and other things, so I think is really interesting, is looking at how girls particularly first get introduced to things like pleasure and the clitoris and knowing about pleasure. And I didn't know anything. I mean, you talk about their first experience of how they actually understand that. And I think that was a bit shocking.
It's really shocking. So the first, in sort of current school education, the first young women hear about the clitoris, which every young woman has, is in female genital mutilation. So it's the loss of the clitoris and the abuse and the control of a woman's body by sort of the patriarchal system. So that is, for the first experience for them to hear of something that actually gives them pleasure and is really important, is more important for a lot of people than actually the reproductive side of things. Yeah, that's not great. So I try and to talk about how, we learn about sex is for reproduction, but it's so much more than that. You know, your body is so much more than that. It's really important for us to understand, because if we're not been talking about pleasure, then straight away it becomes a very sort of male-dominated exercise. Sex becomes for men, essentially. If it's just vaginal sex for reproduction, and that's all we're taught sex is, penis is going into vaginas, it becomes something that is more beneficial for men, because almost 80% of women need some sort of clitoral stimulation to orgasm. So looking at that imbalance there of pleasure.
That's also where sex education, especially in teenagers, started. And I'm hoping it's changed a lot since we were in school. But I simply, all I remember is being given, I think it was a leak and a condom. I'm being told to put that on, and that was it. And they kind of made this weird comment where they went, well, you can do more than heterosexual sex, but we can't talk about that. I mean, personally, as a bisexual woman, I would say that this wasn't particularly helpful for me, because it meant that you spend then years going, oh, is it unusual that I now like women as well? And so it takes a long time to work that out. And if they just talked about it earlier and gone, let's just discuss it.
Yeah.
And at least give you that idea, then everything, at least, you'd have an idea. But I feel sorry for how many teens, struggled later on because of that.
But how many women have any idea that there's something other than the clitoris that also helps, or where other areas of their body? I don't think most women know that. I'm surprised when I talk to patients about this that they have no knowledge of how their body works, and no knowledge that there's more than one area and lots of different areas you can stimulate to get to orgasm. And I think it's
absolutely.
It's
And then
upsetting.
it becomes this shame around it then, doesn't it? You think, well, if I'm not orgasming or enjoying sex because of vaginal penetration, if it's something else, am I broken? Am I okay? Am I wrong? And actually that again brings it back to masturbation. Masturbation isn't just touching genitals. Masturbation is like a whole experience for your body, understanding what works for you and what feels good and where. So you can then help control your own pleasure when it comes to your sexual relationships with other people. And there's no shame then. It's shown that actually the people masturbating actually increases their sexual confidence, it increases their body positivity in relationship with their body, because they know how it works, what feels good. They sort of, they're more interested in their body, they love their body, they respect what their body can do for them a bit more. So yeah, really, really important.
I think otherwise that, I don't know, I think if you look at where people then go, where do they go and find that information out? Well, they go to the internet and they go to porn, which is a very unrealistic expectation, I think, in some ways, of what sex is like.
It is. I mean, I heard it said before, and I say it in my classes and workshops with women and men, is that learning from porn is like learning how to drive from Fast and Furious. Okay, you can watch a Fast and Furious film and that wouldn't teach you how to drive realistically, and you can watch porn and that's not reality. Okay, so you can't learn how to have sex from porn. You can watch porn, and I think when you watch porn, it's understanding, is this perhaps ethical? Can we see consent? Can we see female pleasure as well as male pleasure? Or, making the right choices when it comes to porn, I think, is really important. I wouldn't say, it's not a bad thing necessarily. You just need to make the right choices and look where you'll get your porn from. But yeah, when we need to understand that actually, when we come to sex research or understanding sex, that is the first thing that will come up. Even if you're not putting a sexual topic into Google, something sexual will come up. And so by talking about it early, we can help when that inevitably happens to everyone who have a phone or the internet. We can then help be like, okay, well, I've seen that, and I know that's not real sex, but I've seen it, and that's me, and it's okay.
I think a lot of adults are even adult women are quite intimidated by it. It's an intimidating thing, I think, that's where men, I don't know, they assume that that's what men want, I think.
I think it's intimidating a lot because it's objectifying. Women in porn all are the same to a degree. You've obviously got a lack of body hair, you've got fake breasts, you've got a whole different performance, and it's really important to remember it's performance. When I talk about consent, I always look at, is it freely given? Or in porn they're paid? Is it enthusiastic? In porn they're acting. So we need to remember whether it's reality or not reality. And actually that is really intimidating, because if you see porn as a woman and you see these women doing all these tricks and performing and doing all this different stuff, you don't see the editor's cut, you don't see what's in between those different bits. So it's really, really tricky. You don't see them using lube in between. You don't see them having a quick, water stop in between. You don't see queefing, which is sort of like what people call fanny farts, where the air gets trapped in, which is completely normal. It is completely normal. It's a one-way zone. Okay, so air will get trapped. We don't see the laughing. Sex is meant to be fun. I think that's what a lot of people lose sight of. Sex is meant to be fun and it's enjoyable, and somehow we need to go back to finding that fun in our sexual relationships.
I always try and relate it as well, especially when patients are usually talking about, men like to watch porn. And I go, yes, but, the Kindle e-reader just happened to come out exactly the same time as, 50 Shades of Grey. How many women downloaded that because they felt anonymous? I know I sat on a tube at that time. I could tell you who was reading it.
50 Shades of Grey is really interesting because 50 Shades of Grey was seen as quite a liberating thing for women, because all of a sudden you could read about sex everywhere and everyone was accepting it. But I think it's really important to remember that actually it was only okay if the girl or the woman was submissive.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So then it was socially acceptable. So just being really aware of how female pleasure is framed, I think, a lot of the time, and understanding why then we might feel shame or embarrassment or uncomfortable when it comes to certain conversations, because women have been objectified and their pleasure hasn't been prioritized as much as men's. And so discovering that and empowering young women to find their pleasure and explore it and prioritize it is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have a few questions from patients. That's good, and you must be watching as well. So the first one really is actually been asked a few times in a row, and that is, what happens essentially? What would you do if you've been together, married for, let's say, 10, 12 years?
Mm-hmm.
finding now that the intimacy is going down, you know, it's feeling a little bit like it's the same a lot of the time. How would you kind of bring that spark back in?
So really common to get stuck in repetitive sexual cycles. Really common because you think, right, I know that they used to like it when we did this, then we did this, then we start kissing, or we do this, then we go to this, and we're just gonna jump on top of each other, and I know they like it in the position, I know they're gonna come when I'm in this position, jobs are good and what we're having for tea. So we get stuck in those repetitive sexual cycles, really, really normal. So what I put on my Instagram is I do #change1thing, and it's actually showing that there's this fear that when it comes to changing our sex lives or spicing up our sex lives in a long-term relationship, that we have to buy out an entire sex shop and dress up to the nines and stilettos and a big thong and nipple tassels. Absolutely not. I mean, if that's your thing, please carry on, like absolutely, all power to you. But for a lot of people that's intimidating, and I completely understand why. So actually, by changing just one small thing, we can help ourselves be more mentally present. So when it comes to sex, sex is not just a physical thing. Sex is very much a psychological thing, but also an environmental thing. So we need to think about where we are we comfortable? Are we looking at tomorrow's washing that needs doing and thinking, oh gosh, you don't feel sexy when you're looking at your dirty pants that need to be done for the next day. You know, or you're thinking, oh, have the kids done their homework and things like that. So actually being aware that it's more than just a physical thing, and that #change1thing seeks to just bring in a small change that helps that mental presence. So doing something that you don't normally do. For example, using a blindfold. As soon as you bring that small thing into the sexual scenario, you're focusing on that. You're not thinking about whether you sent that email at work. You're thinking, oh, this feels different. Okay. And your senses focus onto the experience and the touch and how it feels more. So your mental presence zones back. Same with lube, temperature play. There's so many different things you can try. So it's #change1thing. I also talk about scheduling. So scheduling sex sounds really unsexy, doesn't it? Like putting it in the diary or making sure it's on the calendar, but actually it means you prioritize that time for yourselves and that your experience, even if you don't fancy sex on that day, that's absolutely fine. Just take that time to be together or connect in some way. And you prioritize your relationship in that sense there. So looking at that sort of change one thing, understanding that sex is more than physical, I think are really, really important things to see.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. I think that kind of leads us on to one of our other questions, which is that when you're new parents, I think that can be a really difficult time because there's a huge transition point for intimacy. And I think any tips that I think a lot of the time I see, actually, that's why I think a lot of couples might get divorced around that time.
It's usually around that period, isn't it?
With young children.
Yeah.
I think, are there any tips you've got for new parents?
Yeah, so new parents, firstly, you need to remember that as people, we grow and evolve. So your relationship does change. It naturally changes. You are parents as well as lovers, as well as partners, as well as, paying your rent or anything. So it's all teamwork, isn't it? And it's all in different sort of slots in your head. So we need to think about perhaps scheduling that time and prioritizing that time. Reconnecting is really hard because physically we might feel overtouched. If you're breastfeeding or if you've got toddlers on you all day and you just want them out, you don't want to be touched at the end of the day. You don't want to put them to bed and think, oh no, they're going to come onto me and touch me, and I just don't want that. Is that overtouch sensation. So it's understanding that, okay, at the end of the day, we might need that break, or we might need touch in a different way. So we don't want that sort of clingy touch. We might need sort of a longer hold or a real hug, like understanding that pressure and that feeling is different. We might need to look at dating again, is something really important. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be out. Again, like sort of change one thing. You don't have to go wild and do everything. It could be taking that time to have a picnic on your living room floor and play a board game.
I think, isn't it? A bit of non-mum time. Yeah. But you're actually a woman again.
Being you, totally. And then the other thing is looking at, especially when it comes to that touch, is something called sexual currency. So sexual currency is touch that you would give your partner that, say, you wouldn't give a relative. So it's sort of that a kiss that lingers for a bit longer, a touch as you walk past them, a hug, or that little interactions, but they mustn't be, that means they want sex. It's normalizing it, and you have to tell yourself to do it. You have to do it. At first, it might feel weird. You might say to each other, right, we need to do this thing. It's called sexual currency. We're going to touch each other more, but it doesn't mean it leads to sex. Because quite often, if your partner gives you a lingering kiss or a lingering hug, you think, oh God, they're going to want sex later, and oh, am I in the mood? So actually, it's thinking, no, this is normal. We're going to start touching each other more, feeling each other more, because it builds up a subconscious desire in your psychological mind, where you're actually thinking, okay, yeah, you're reconnecting without realizing you're reconnecting. It just takes a while to normalize it. So you try doing it 10 times a day, different small touches, helping to sort of rekindle that desire, or grow that subconscious desire in your mind for wanting sex. And then again, I've already spoken about it, but masturbation is really, really important. Again, to sort of reconnect with your body, especially if you are a woman who is giving birth and your body feels a bit alien and not yours and weird. It's taking back that ownership. Completely taking back the ownership.
The body image as well, I think a lot of women's bodies change during that time, and I think they feel a bit self-conscious about it.
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely. And it's understanding that your body's done something incredible, absolutely bloody incredible, and it's actually that's really, really great. And sort of respecting your body for that, and taking the time to look and explore your body. Lots of women don't want to look at their genitals, especially after giving birth. They might be scared or what they look at, but actually it's really important to understand from a young age what is involved with our genitals. Where is our urethra, our vagina? Where is our anus? Where is our clitoris? What do our labia look like? Because everyone's is different. There's no thing the same. And yet labiaplasty, or plastic sort of surgery on vulvas, is massively rising, because we see on social media or magazines these high-legged bikinis and think, well, where do they put their labia? Where mine are out, or mine are,
isn't it? It definitely is. I've got a lot of patients who've gone through that. It's amazing now when you take a history how many people have done it. It's interesting. It's definitely risen, and it's unnecessary, I think, for a healthy body. I don't know.
It always amazes me as well, because I see a lot of couples, and I always find it interesting when they've had a child, their perception of her body. And it's interesting. She's like, it's awful. I've got bigger breasts. I'm wider hipped. And he's like, it's amazing. She looks phenomenal. She looks like a goddess now. And I'm like, have you said those words to her?
And also having a baby, and I think they respect that. They're really impressed by the fact they've gone through the birth process.
Oh, and it's amazing, isn't it? It's incredible. And you think, and so many friends of ours, partners, have been like when you get that first message, their baby's been born, it's often, they did incredible, they were amazing, and that you get this newfound respect for each other, especially when you become parents and you see the qualities of your partner that you've chosen to have children with, and you think, actually, you see them with your children and bringing them up and raising them, and you look at each other in a very different light, and that psychologically changes your sexual relationship with that person. It's bound to, but it doesn't mean it changes it for a bad way. We're often told, especially when people get married, you're told, well, that's it now, you're going to be having sex now, and then you have children, oh, that's it now, God. Actually, that shouldn't be the way. We should be actually having better sex the way we get older, and we learn about each other and understand each other, and feel more comfortable with each other to explore.
Fun side. Bringing that fun back in, because you
absolutely. We all have different life chapters. I always say we're all writing a story in which we're the main character. We've all got different chapters within that story, and the pages are going to keep turning. So it's adapting and evolving throughout those chapters, and understanding what's right for us with our sexuality as we go through.
And it's just trying to bring some reminders in as well. I mean, I know as a chiropractor, I get asked quite an impressive amount of times about sex, but more to do with pain. It's usually a woman comes in, or even the husband, and they're always very nervous, and they're like, oh, it's quite painful for her back when we're having sex. And I usually sit there and go, you're quite a lot heavier than she is. Very gently, I try and remind them there was more than one position.
And people forget that, and people are worried about that. They're worried sort of actually exploring that, and I think sometimes maybe it's a confidence issue of different angles. I know, for example, sex, if you're looking at heterosexual sex with a woman on top, a lot of women are worried, oh, they'll see me and my tummy or my body. And actually, you can do it in different ways. You can really lean forward, so you're, in more intimate and kissing them face to face, and then sort of feel confident enough to sort of bring your body back and be able to see them. You can do so many different positions, and also remembering that sex isn't just penis and vagina. Sex is a whole. But like I said, I always say sex is an umbrella term. So sex is any kind of sexual act that you enjoy. 80% of women need clitoral stimulation to reach some sort of orgasm or find pleasure. So actually, penis and vagina sex doesn't benefit most women, if you look at it that way. So we need to look at sex as a broader spectrum of enjoyment and play. Like that play element is really, really important. So positioning, sex should never be painful. There's obviously times when sex might be uncomfortable, in which case you need to actually stop and reevaluate what you're doing in that. But sex shouldn't be regularly painful. That's something that should be explored if it is. Lubrication is huge. It's, if anyone wants to add something to their bedside table, lubricant. Before anything, before sexy underwear, before anything else, lubricant, because that is huge. If you
Bit of a sticker about it though, isn't it? It's kind of like, oh, I've reached that time where I need it. And you're like,
they're too dry. I think they believe they're too dry. There's something wrong.
Or you might have someone say, oh, do I not turn you on enough? And actually, that's totally not about that. We all have different vaginal dryness depending on our menstrual cycle and our hormones. So it completely depends on what those hormones are and what time of the month we are and where we are in our cycle. That is relevant to everyone, no matter how old you are, how young you are. And then obviously we have then menopausal sort of ages where you might
pregnancy, also another common time when people
breastfeeding.
Breastfeeding. Yeah.
So there's so many different stages. So if we can start normalizing lube, actually that's going to create better sex for everyone, because it's better for everyone involved when there's lube involved. So yeah, massive.
Great tip. Can I ask, we've also had a question that was about sex drive, that was about if one partner has a much higher sex drive than the other partner, I think that creates a lot of aggravation between them. How could you handle that?
So often when people enter sex therapy, that is usually the question that's brought up. That's the immediate thing. Well, I've got a bigger sex drive than them and we don't feel we're compatible sexually. And actually, when you break it down, it's not a case of an imbalance of sex drive. It's an imbalance of circumstances. So it might be, like we talked about earlier, sex is not just physical. So it's physical, environmental, and psychological. So actually, it might be a case of looking at what environment suits you both best. Is it after work on a Wednesday in the middle of the week when you're feeling rubbish? Or is it, do we need to think about, okay, I really want sex this night, but I know that actually the circumstances about this evening aren't great for you. You're thinking about, you've got a meeting tomorrow and all the rest of it. So understanding that, communicating those. I quite often get people to list what are your optimum environmental factors. So on a weekend, a lazy Sunday morning when you don't have any pressure to do anything, I mean, unless you've got children running around the house, again, that's another environmental thing. Have you got have you got children in the house? So it's what right for you there. Psychologically, looking at body confidence, looking at what feels good for you, understanding sort of what mentally either triggers you to feel comfortable or uncomfortable is really important. Understanding, again, any shame we've got around it, and just appreciating, there is a mental side to sex and desire. And then physical. So you used to like it when I touched you there and you don't like it anymore. And it's not because they've lost desire, it's because they've changed as people. And so listing sort of your optimum situations in those three columns. This feels good, this is my favorite touch here, this is my favorite sort of time of the week, or when feels good, when I know that the washing's done and the chores are done and I know that work's not stressful. This is the best of time psychologically. When you tell me how good I look in a dress, or when you talk to me and say, like when I've seen you being a brilliant parent and it's just amazing and I'm so attracted to you, like psychologically, it all makes a bigger picture then. And then so you can break it down into different ways.
It's that communication again, isn't it? I think it's a loss of communication.
Yeah. Also that time frame thing as well. I mean, when the stresses, when you're younger and you've got less stresses, you spend a long time in the foreplay, a long time in the cuddling. But for some reason, when you get older, it's like, oh, she was faster. And you wonder why it's a problem.
That's it. So I had a workshop with some women, and we talked about how we miss like dry humping and fingering, things like that, because we miss that sort of teenagey, young 20s element of where you sort of just were all over each other and enjoyed each other, and that touch, it's so different.
And you go out on dates for a really long time and spend lots of time with touch them too and relating, and I think you miss all of that and you don't do it as much.
And that's why that's also important.
And I think for a lot of women as well, that there's a huge, I don't know if it's women and men, but I hear it a lot more from women, that the psychological element of they need that more to be turned on, to have that libido. If they don't feel that connection emotionally, they struggle sometimes to feel that sexually as well.
Yeah. And they have to ask for what you want.
Yeah, that's it. So you've got obviously everyone's heard of Viagra for men, because chemically we can make that work for men. We can't make that work physically for women because we need more of a bigger picture. The environmental and psychological factors are required a lot more. They're also required for men, don't get me wrong, but there's a bigger picture when it comes to women, which is why there's not that sort of one fix program in which there is for some men.
Yes, brilliant.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Debbie. That was absolutely brilliant. We could keep going, but we reached the end of our time here. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
And thank you much also for all our viewers. As always, we will put these back onto the Natural Doctors site. And of course, we'll make sure that everyone can view this at any
You
time.
can see it on YouTube later as well if you want to.
That's perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.